show. It's our pleasure to welcome Dr. Ken Cyree. He is a professor of finance and also the dean of the School of Business Administration at Ole Miss. Dr. Cyree, always good to see you, sir. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Gerard. I appreciate you having me. Always great to be on.
You bet. All right, so we've been talking a lot the last couple of weeks, including today, about the tariffs that the Trump administration has imposed and negotiations underway. Of course, the big holdout at this point appears to be China, which is, I think, our third largest trading partner from an import perspective behind Canada and Mexico. Of course, most of what we get from Canada is oil. And then with respect to other imports from Canada and Mexico, a lot of that is American companies who manufacture in those countries. And to some extent, that's true in China. But I just don't see China bending at this point. Dr. Cyree, what do you think?
Well, that's a tough call, right? That's the $64,000 question. But I do agree with you. I think that they believe they can wait us out and that Trump will bend to political pressure. I don't know that I would want to place that bet if I were them, but they appear to be headed in that direction. So it's been very interesting. A lot of uncertainty, and markets don't like uncertainty. Bankers don't like uncertainty. Business people don't like uncertainty. So I think a lot of what we've seen over the last 5 or 7 or 8 days, whatever it's been, has really just been that. It's the uncertainty of what's going to happen. I do think long run it'll be good for the economy. Certainly, if we see interest rates come down, which we've seen a mixed bag there. Oil prices have come down, again, a mixed bag there too to some extent. And prices are all over the place depending on what you're talking about. And, I do think, for example, if Trump would have come out and given a speech about, I think tariffs should go down in other countries for U.S. products, you and I both know absolutely nothing would have happened. But the way that he's done it, now all of a sudden I think the other countries are saying, now, wait a minute, we may or may not agree with it, but for sure it's going to impact our country too. So they're willing to come to the table and talk. And I think that's a lot of what President Trump is trying to do. I'm not on his team. I don't know anybody in the inside there who can tell me that, but that's just my sense that I get in watching from afar, that it's a little of both. It's to generate revenue, it's to get people to the table, it's to create a level playing field. And if all of that can happen, I think it'll be good in the long run. Maybe not in the short run, but in the long run.
So what do you think, Dr. Cyree, about the oscillation in the announcement? We've got an announcement, we're putting these tariffs on, and then we back off a week later and say, hey, look, we're going to pause that for a while. Of course, huge market sell-off right after the announcement. And then over the weekend, Friday late, he says, okay, we're going to pause or exempt certain devices, electronics, smartphones, chips, routers, switches, computers, etc., coming from China from the reciprocal tariffs. But he said, but look, that doesn't mean that's permanent. And that's the uncertainty we're talking about. That's really rattling markets, and it's difficult to operate a business in that environment, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. Whether or not it's planned, I don't know. It's probably one of two things. Either he planned to do this because that gives maximum pressure for negotiation, or he's listening to people that are advising him saying, look, this is a bad idea. We need to slow this roll down a little bit and try to figure out what makes the most sense that's the best for the United States. Or perhaps the third option is he realizes, okay, that particular move was a mistake and I'm going to correct that. So I don't have a problem with any of those three scenarios. I would rather, even if he thought it was a mistake and he's backing it down, I would rather him do that than just stay on a particular policy just because he doesn't want to admit he's wrong. So I'm glad to see that they're adjusting. This is uncharted territory. Oddly enough, Gerard, I've gotten this question a lot over the last week about tariffs, and my answer has largely been, look, when I was in school, in graduate school in the 90s, we didn't talk about tariffs. Or if you did, it was 10 seconds, right? Tariffs used to exist in the 1800s, and you moved on. So it's not something that people my age, at least, have thought about very much. So it's we don't know what we're doing. We're in new territory here, uncharted waters. And, I do think there will be a benefit at the end, but it was going to be some choppy waters for sure, I think, for a while.
Yeah. Dr. Cyree, it would be purely speculative, but just really seeking your opinion on this more than anything. Is to what extent do you think the tumult in the bond markets played a role in the president coming forth last week and announcing a pause in the tariffs? You've seen this. There's been some delevering and selling of U.S. Treasuries going on to an extent that I don't think I can remember, except, I don't know, last time I saw anything like that. It's probably been 40, 50 years, honestly.
Yeah, a lot of volatility in bond markets. If you're really into some of these theories about they tried to tank the interest rate so they could refinance the debt, I don't know that they were really trying to do it. Maybe they were, I don't know, but that's kind of like saying I know the cards you're holding in your hand in our game of poker, which is pretty unlikely. So I think so. I think they're getting real-time feedback. I think the Secretary of the Treasury is doing a good job too, giving Trump some solid feedback. But I do think it's not wise to look strictly at short-term market volatility, but try to think about where we need to be in 6 months or a year or even 5 years. That's kind of the knock on the U.S. business environment, is that everybody's so focused on the next quarterly earnings report or whatever.
Yeah.
We need to make better decisions based upon the long term. So I'm okay with a little bit of, I say that, I'm okay with a little volatility, but I freaked out just like everybody else watching my stock portfolio decline by 15% in about 2 days. So, yeah, it's tough.
Something that I don't think many folks really understand, and it is kind of complicated. Those in the financial industry certainly do. It's called the basis trade, and this is a common practice among hedge funds to basically borrow money to go buy Treasury securities, and then they use the Treasury securities as collateral, then turn around. I think I'm explaining this right, my understanding of it, then turn around and buy Treasury futures and sell the Treasuries, and just kind of shifting the dollars around and making a small amount of money, but on big dollars with this basis trade.
Yeah, that's a very good explanation. And there are a lot of levered trades you can do, whether it's Bitcoin or a stock or any derivative you want, a commodity, oil or corn or whatever, in those same manners. And I think what this really did was it showed the volatility and the problems in some of these markets. Things work great till they don't. And as Warren Buffett said, right, when the tide goes out, you get to see who's been swimming naked. And that's kind of an ugly thought here for some of us, perhaps, but it is really and truly created a lot of turmoil. Some of it, I think, is good because you are exposing the things that maybe don't make a lot of sense. But all else constant, I do think long run it'll be good for the economy.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe some of this delevering, which does pressure the bond market. We got yields rising, and the bad news there is that, as you know, the 10-year drives mortgage rates, chattel mortgages, consumer credit card rates as well. And when we saw the 10-year spike up on the same day that the Dow dropped 2,000 points, I really do think that's what got the president to come out and make a public announcement. We're going to pause this thing. He said they got yippee, is what he said.
Yeah, I think you're right. They will never tell us that probably, but they're definitely watching interest rates and they're watching the markets too. I think Trump is more concerned at the moment with kind of getting this thing done more permanently. I hope that we can get it done. A lot of the things he's doing, I really like, that we can get it done a little bit more permanently. But a great example in addition to the tariffs is the Doge stuff. I watched that and it just makes me want to pull my hair out when you find out some of the fraud, and rather than dealing with the fraud of 140-year-olds getting Social Security, we want to yell at Elon, or some people do. It makes me crazy, I think. But we've got to get a handle on this stuff so that we can get the ship righted and move in the right direction. And hopefully they will be able to do that. But the tariffs, like I said, it's one of those three options. Either they looked at things and said, okay, we need to back off here, back off there. Maybe it's a negotiating tactic. I don't know. Or maybe they had it planned exactly like that all along. It's just tough to know.
We're up against a break. If you can hang around, we can continue the discussion. You good with that, Dr. Cyree?
Yeah,
all right. We got Dr. Ken Cyree. He is the Dean of the School of Business at Ole Miss. We're coming right back after a break. We're in the Element Wealth studio. We've got Dr. Ken Cyree. He's a professor of finance, also the dean of the School of Business Administration at Ole Miss. We're talking about the Trump tariff strategy. So, Dr. Cyree, what about this trade deficit? You know, when you look at the strategy, and I know you said earlier you think in the long run this will be good for Americans and America's economy. It's a bit unclear, though, exactly what the goal is, and maybe there are multiple goals and objectives. And I think that's probably what the Trump administration could have improved on. They seem to even be acknowledging that. You know, some in his inner circle that are speaking on behalf of the White House are trying to now sort of get ahead of this thing and speak more in specific terms about what the goals are. Is it to reshore American manufacturing and bring lots of those factories that were sent overseas for cheap labor back into this country? Is it to produce revenue from the tariffs? Is it to eliminate the so-called trade deficit, the difference between what we import and what we export? Is it some of all the above?
I really do think it's all of the above. And I also think that they're looking at the currency too, right? Because the problem is that China or any other country for that matter could devalue their currency and try to make it more difficult on us that way as a point of leverage. But the part that you mentioned that I think is incredibly important is the manufacturing base. And when you think about, for example, making semiconductors or something like that where you need rare earth minerals. I don't even really know what rare earth minerals are. You know, I know the people that are really smart and do those things know what that is. Apparently they're pretty rare, right? I guess hence the name. So but we don't need to be depending on China for everything or any one country for everything. And, you know, in any business, you don't want to have a sole supplier for something that's critical to your business. So if you think about it in those terms, the United States doesn't need to get in a spot where we don't make X, whatever X is, if we really do need that. You know, if it's a plastic toy or a little small steel part or something like that that's easy to manufacture, that's different. But certainly with respect to defense and things like that, I believe that, you know, that's something that they're trying to work on with these tariffs to try to reshore some of this manufacturing. And I do think that's a good thing. That'll take some time, though. You don't just build a new car plant or something like that in 15 minutes. It will take a little time. But I do think that it is an all of the above strategy. And by the way, Trump has been thinking about tariffs since the 90s. I saw a video the other day from the 90s where he was talking about this. So yeah, this is not some flippant thing he threw out there last week. He really believes this is the way to go. And certainly if you look at the differential tariffs that were across countries, it was quite shocking to me in some cases, some of the differences that we were paying versus what they were paying. And what they were saying is, look, we're trying to protect our local manufacturing from American products. But yet when we go to do that, they say, well, wait a minute, this is the worst thing that's ever happened is these tariffs. You guys are very mean. But no, I do think it's an all of the above strategy. And I do think we're going to have some turmoil for a while. I don't know how long a while is. I hope it's relatively short-lived, but it'll be challenging, I think, for a little bit. Probably the next 3 months to 6 months, at least, I would guess. But I don't know. It may all be squared away in a month, or it may go on for a year or two. Who knows?
Totally hard to tell. You brought up another dimension that I totally agree with, which is the national security aspect of this. It doesn't make sense that there are some goods that are just critical to our safety and our overall prosperity, economic prosperity, that we're relying on what really is a foe on the world stage to produce. I mean, China could tomorrow say, hey, look, we're not shipping you any more antibiotics, for example. I noted also that we import lots of parts for nuclear power plants in this country, are actually manufactured abroad in China. You know, trade and open trade and just negotiating tariffs, to me, Dr. Cyree, and get your take on this, is a lot easier when you're dealing with honest people who share the same values we do about human life and just markets in general, but trying to negotiate with communists, honestly, and a communist regime that has very little regard for human life and, in fact, just puts the country above individual people in life, that complicates and compounds this effort, does it not?
Oh, it absolutely does, and that's what has made this so difficult. If you saw the other day Kevin O'Leary, who was talking about the Chinese stealing IP and all the
Yeah,
things that they do, they don't play by the rules. They don't respect the law, and that's not a political or opinionated criticism. That's just a fact, and so we have to deal with that. And if you're going to buy products from someone you don't trust, you can do that, but you better make sure that you have safeguards in place to make the processing and the transaction work as well as it can, given that you don't trust the person. So, or in this case, the country. So it really creates a conundrum for something like military goods or something that's critical to our infrastructure. I mean, again, I don't know if this is true or not. I saw a story about them making the power grid parts, and if
right.
they, if we had those pulled back, we would be in a world of hurt. If the power grid went down and we didn't have the parts to make that whole again. So there's a lot of things like that. Antibiotics, one you mentioned, everybody's talked about that probably, but that's a huge problem. One thing I will say too, another point that's really good in our favor is no matter what you're making, let's say you're making a plastic toothbrush that we carry with us when we travel, very cheap toothbrush, and we're getting those from China. And the reason is we cannot do them in the United States cheaply. Well, probably the U.S. manufacturer is looking at making, maybe 10,000 of them, and then with the tariff, the Chinese product becomes too expensive. So now the U.S. manufacturer can ramp up scale, and instead of making 10,000, maybe they make 200,000 or 2 million, and those costs go down. So that effect will happen too, and how that will play out remains to be seen in the future. It's unseen at the moment. And, there's a lot of secondary effects here that we don't know how they're going to play out because we've never dealt with tariffs since, 100 and something years ago.
Certainly not to this degree. Ronald Reagan, in the 80s, of course, he imposed tariffs on some of the semiconductor products imported from Japan because, honestly, they were breaking a pact. It was really more about citing them for that, and ultimately that got worked out. So I had this opinion, just want to get your response as well, that maybe we're overshooting a little bit the effect of job creation as a result of reshoring manufacturing, that the next generation of factory, to your example of making toothbrushes, I'm not sure there'll be any humans in a plant that makes toothbrushes in the future. You're absolutely right. When you're scaling, you can drive costs down. You got a certain amount of fixed costs, and then you've also got input costs as well. And if you're buying more, usually you can negotiate more favorably with your vendors of those products. So all that contributes to being more competitive on the world stage. I don't think Americans will pay a super premium for American-made goods, but I do think we're facing a period where automation and technology could allow us to essentially reshore and replace what's being built at ridiculous, almost indentured servitude labor rates in this country.
Yeah, that's true. And we compete primarily through efficiency and productivity. We don't compete with low wages, and there are plenty of countries who do compete with low wages, but they're going to win if it's a very low skill, low labor, low technology product. They're going to win that, and frankly, they should. They should be able to do that. You can still have a tariff on them and still have a very affordable product. We need to be making things that are a little bit more complicated, and to some extent, we certainly do. Right? We're
Yeah.
making the complicated things in the United States, but when we were young, Gerard, there were plenty of factories around right here in Mississippi, furniture factories and all sorts of things where people made furniture or something similar, textiles or something like that in the United States. I grew up in a textile area, and those plants are pretty much gone. So the the onshoring will affect that. I'm certain it will, but you're right, not to the extent that chicken in every pot kind of political speech there. You're going to see, I think, some resurgence, but not where every person now has 12 job offers to work in something. But we'll need to retrain some skills too, I think, because we've lost a lot of
Yeah.
manufacturing in the last 40 years. And, usually when we do get those manufacturing plants, it creates a real great economic impact above and beyond the direct impact. We've seen that with the car plants in Mississippi, whether it's Nissan or Toyota, and the ancillary products that come out of that are really, really good. So, I'm hopeful that this will work out. It's just right now it's a little tough, and we have to be patient, which is clearly not my strong suit. But I'm trying to hang in there and have the faith and hope, I think.
Gotcha. Dr. Ken Cyree, Professor of Finance and Dean of the School of Business Administration at Ole Miss, has been our guest. Always good to talk to you, Dean. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, too. It's always good to talk with you.
Yes, sir. We're coming right back, folks, with half an hour remaining of middays from the Element Wealth Studio.